Hi everyone, Redneck Computer Geek here and welcome to my channel. I've ended up with this Hyundai Santa Fe. It's a 2006. I went to park it and all of a sudden it just wouldn't start. I did some research, found out that on these, they're really common to just kill the starter out of nowhere. So today we're going to be putting a new starter in. The first thing I'm going to show you before we put the starter in is how to go and use a set of jumper cables on the starter in order to be able to test it. That way you can test the starter that you get, and once you get the old starter out, you can test it outside of the vehicle to make sure whether it works or not. So let's get started with that. I'm going to pull out the starter, set it up with the jumper cables, and then show you what to jump on the solenoid to replace. Alright, so hopefully you can see what we're doing here, but basically on the back of your solenoid you've got your positive here and you've got your solenoid terminal here. This solenoid is a positive activated solenoid. So what we're going to do, I'm sorry that cables are going to get in the way, but having these already hooked up to a good battery or a jumper pack, we're going to hook a ground onto the outside of it. We're going to take the positive, we're going to hook it across this terminal here, and then what you're going to do is take a set of alligator clips, clip one end onto this, and just very carefully touch the end of your jumper cable, and you should end up with the gear here engaging. And this thing is torquey, so it's going to kick. Ready? And there we go. You've tested it. You can see that it actuates across the window. Now we can pull the old one and test that one too. Okay, one thing that's usually missing out of other how-to videos that I try and do in mine is a location aspect. So this is the direction that the starter goes when you're putting it into the engine. It's actually just behind this panel. The exhaust comes down and the starter actually goes in from this direction just over the top of the exhaust. I'm going to grab the camera now and grab a light and show you where the panel is underneath that your starter is supposed to be behind, if it still has the heat protection panel. Now one thing I'd like to say is always put those back. They're there for a reason. They're so that this doesn't overheat and die prematurely. Alright, so in underneath we've got our front oxygen sensor. We're going to follow the exhaust down across, and then to the side of it you're going to see this right here. That bolt, and there should be another bolt there and another on the other side of the shield need to be removed. That gets you to the starter, and you can actually see the starter right here and behind the panel. So that's one of your bolts there. Now at this point, if you haven't already, you need to make sure that the positive side of your battery is fully disconnected and set aside and unable to connect. Because once we start removing that starter, that positive side becomes a welding cable. So you need to make sure that's removed at this point. Now we're going to get in underneath and remove the two bolts that are on the solenoid, rather a bolt and a pull-off. I'll show you those now. Alright, so from here we can see behind the oil filter there is a rubber cap that you have to pull off. That's your positive going back to the battery. And this terminal that has to be pulled off, it should just slip. So there's a nut under here and this terminal. Okay, so at this point right here we've got this stud that goes through, and that goes to a 14mm that's on this side. You're going to need a box wrench for that. And then up behind this mount, where you can't get a camera to, there should be another 14 up here. And then from there the starter is going to drop out. It's heavy, so pay attention. So here we are. This is the transmission side of the engine. Here you can see the one we had to put the box wrench on. Up here is where the other 14mm nut was, up in right in there. And so all we're going to do is grab this, slide it towards the passenger side of the vehicle, lower it down and out. And with that, installation is basically a reverse process of this video, but we are going to take this and try and kick it over first. Alright, so as we did before, we're going to ground it. I'm going to put positive on this terminal. Step on it, make sure it stays. Positive on that one, and touch it to the battery. So that actually kicked over. It may have just been bad contacts.
You got a starter for nothing?
No, this one's not exactly clicking over great, so it may just be the fact that the relay wasn't working correctly. Okay, let's talk about what just happened. What is going on here is that in newer vehicles, they actually have starter relays, they also have burglar alarm relays, along with the starter solenoid itself. So, what has happened is somewhere in that series of relays, there is a fault and is not sending anything to the starter. And the way that I can prove that right now is that right now the key in the ignition is set to the on position, and I have a button. So, as you can hear, it started up. What I've done is I've gone from the positive on the battery directly to where I was telling you to connect on the starter, and I can start the vehicle. So, what that tells me is that from this ignition wire here, this wire here in the diagram should come down and it should go to a relay here and a relay here. And from there, there should be this wire that comes down and goes to the starter unit, which is connected to that prong that I showed you on the starter. What I've done is I've just plain gone from the battery to a push button and to this, totally circumventing all of this setup here. Now, I need to fix this, but at least I'm up and running and I can drive it.